The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Welcome back to another episode of Titans of Nuclear. Today we're welcoming Paris Ortiz-Wines from Stand Up for Nuclear. Paris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we'll just dive in with the age-old Titans question, which is, tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up? And where did you get to you interested in science as a kid? Tell me about your upbringing.
Yeah, so I grew up in a beautiful beach town called Santa Barbara here in California. And, living right next to the beach, loved doing all the water activities. It had perfect weather all the time. And come to find out, it was actually an hour and a half south of our only nuclear plant that's currently in operation, Diablo Canyon in California. And so growing up, I wanted to do many things. I changed my major a couple of times in City College. But when I learned about climate change for the first time in City College, I was like, wow, this is a huge issue. How did I never know about it? I didn't know about energy. I didn't know about anything. And so I decided to pursue a degree in environmental studies. And I ended up at the University of Santa Cruz. So 5 hours north of where I was residing. It just was like first 2 years, I was going to transfer there, had a big family unit and big community in Santa Barbara that I always thought I'd return to. But when I went to the University of Santa Cruz, I think it was, college is a big thing for any person. Like when you go away, it's like kind of an awakening, right? Like it's your first time usually away from your parents, and you have to rely on yourself for a lot of things. So I watched a documentary called Cowspiracy and I went vegan, and then I started making like my own deodorant and my own shampoo and conditioner. And I was fully in the movement of like, oh my God, we have to redeem ourselves. Like we're doing so much harm to the earth.
Right.
And so I thought I was gonna work for Sierra Club. Like I applied to Sierra Club.
Oh, wow.
And NRDC, like I knew nothing. Like I was like, what does environmental studies do? Like, what do I do as a career? Like, how do I help? Right. Like everybody's looking for that way to make their mark in the world. And I was like, these big companies or organizations would be it. And then I found myself into nuclear. Like I started at a nonprofit and their main focus was nuclear energy. And for me, maybe it's similar for you. I didn't have any of the baggage for nuclear. So I was like, yeah, sounds real cool. Like that's going to be the solution. And then I wasn't sad anymore.
Yeah. How did you find that path into nuclear, and what is that environmental progress, or what it was?
Yeah. So I started at environmental progress. So I graduated Santa Cruz, and me and my partner moved up to the Bay. I was like, well, there's no jobs for me in Santa Barbara, so might as well go make a name for myself, and then maybe I'll return. And so environmental progress was the organization that I started at. That was Michael Schellenberger's previous organization, and started off as an assistant. And I was like, so stoked. Like I'm working at an environmental nonprofit. I'm doing the thing. But oh wait, we do this really weird thing. We support nuclear energy and we save existing plants from closing down. And we were in the heart of Berkeley, which is currently a nuclear free zone, which is something that we're trying to undo. But yeah, I had to watch the TED Talk, and it was why I changed my mind about nuclear from Michael. And for me,
did you watch the TED Talk before joining Environmental Progress, or
yes. Yeah. So that was one of the things, right? They're like, hey, have you looked at our website? Have you watched the TED Talk? And I said, yes, I did. Like I did my homework, and I was like, I'm on board. Like there was no hurdle, there was no convincing me because I didn't have any of the fears and baggage with
Mm,
it.
yeah.
All I knew was, I think the word association was nuclear means bombs. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, there's energy. Like I felt so
Yeah.
dumb that I never knew about it. Like I just,
Mhm.
energy wasn't a big topic in environmental studies. Like you could opt into it and take classes, but
Yeah.
there's a big divide between engineering and humanities. So I think I don't know, there's disdain for each other. And I feel like I was cheaped. Like I was like, I should have had to have taken a class on energy because it is such a vital part of humanity and then also environment.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So you learn about nuclear, you join environmental progress as assistant. What was because then were you doing research there, or did you transition from this? Like, how did you then like sort of get deeply
Yeah,
involved
yeah, yeah.
in the
I'm sorry.
research?
Let's continue the journey.
No,
So
no, you're good.
get the assistant job. And I'm like, okay, very cool. Get to go on a couple trips. And then, having the humanities degree, I was like, I should have done some more science stuff. So the analyst at the time, Mark Nelson,
Hmm.
was there doing all the numbers. And I was like, Mark, you need to teach me, like, help me understand what energy is, kilowatt hour versus kilowatt power versus energy.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't know where to start. So I transitioned into like a research assistant position and helped with all of the energy graphs that we would put out used in Michael's articles and reports. And then we come across in 2000, I'm trying to get my dates. With COVID, all the times like blur together
Yeah.
a little bit. So 2019, 2018, we were like, we got to do something. Like nuclear plants keep shutting down. There's nobody's moving on it.
Yeah.
And that's when Nuclear Pride Fest was instituted, which was a coalition of groups based in Europe that came together and were like, we need to come together for a day. Like, we need to go out and engage with the community.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. And
Yeah.
then that is what has transitioned into Stand Up for Nuclear. So
Mm,
during 2020, everybody kind of broke off from environmental progress, and Mark and I went off, and I basically continued the project. I basically have we can't let it die. So I'm volunteering my time for this global initiative, and it's very simple. We
yeah.
advocate for protection and expansion of
Yeah.
nuclear,
Yeah.
whatever that may look like, small, big, existing, future ones.
Yeah.
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 That's how I found myself in it.
Yeah. One more environmental progress question, just
Yeah.
as someone who's chatted with Mark Nelson and Maddie Zerwinski and stuff. I feel like there's like in my head, there's like this group of like you, Mark Nelson, Maddie Zerwinski, Sid Baga, like folks who like were sort of in the cult of environmental progress who are now like all doing like very amazing and very different like works in nuclear advocacy. What do you feel like was like influential about the atmosphere at environmental progress, or like how did you all like just how did you all work as a unit? I don't know if you guys were all there at the same time or just like what was the sort of like path springboarding off of environmental?
Yeah, it seems like an incubator, right? Like
Yeah.
Michael is this brilliant mind on nuclear and was one of, I would say one of the leading ones for action. And when you come into EP, it was a very small team. Like Maddie was the VP, Mark was like the analyst, I was assistant, then turned research assistant, then we had somebody else as the Michael's assistant.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think worked was that everybody's input was valued. Like whenever Michael would write a piece, like an article, everybody got the copy, regardless if like you are super technically knowledgeable. It was like, we want your opinion. And so I think that sense of like fostering your voice, and then also because it's a small team, it's kind of like a startup vibe in the sense of everybody works together on projects. Mark and Maddie and I would work on projects, we'd travel together. And I think we could see we were never limited in what we could do. And I think that really helped us and inspired us to like, oh, there's so much more we can do. And I think we all are outgrowing, our current positions. And I think COVID really was like, what are you going to do with your life? COVID really made a lot of people reevaluate. And Michael went off and did his own thing. And so I think it was perfect timing. So I think there was a sense of confidence that was built there with a small team and with a leader that really doesn't shy away from anything. Like
Yeah.
he's very outspoken.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So all right, so then we transitioned from environmental progress to Stand Up for Nuclear, and you said it was a collaboration with, or it's the joining of a lot of European groups, or maybe speak a little about like the origin of Stand Up for Nuclear and how, yeah.
Yeah, so originally it's called Nuclear Pride Fest. So there was about a dozen European groups. So back at EP, Michael and Maddie went to Europe to engage with these groups. And we're like, let's form the Nuclear Pride Coalition, who will host a Nuclear Pride Fest. And then after the success of our first one in Germany, Munich, many groups
in
wanted.
Germany.
I know. We went to the heart of anti-nuclearism, and surprisingly, like, well received. Like there was only a couple people that were really, I think some were from the Chernobyl area era, and they were like, how dare you?
Yeah.
You know. But anyways, success for Munich, and then people wanted to join, and that's when the rebranding happened for Stand Up. So that first year was under EP's umbrella, and then 2020 came around, we all split off, and then Stand Up, was a standalone global initiative. It was, we wanted to rebrand it a little bit, that anybody can join it, anybody can use the name as long as under these conditions, right, of promoting our message and mission.
Yeah.
So now we are in our 4th year, I believe, going on our 5th. And, the recognition comes from these events that we do. So our main thing is action and awareness. And that has looked like throwing on a Stand Up for Nuclear event. And it could be as small as like a tabling event or like signing outside a certain area, or all the way up to international events or even reactor closures, where we go there and we memorialize the loss of the power. So not all are happy and not all are like very hopeful, but it is to say that there is a voice saying that is wrong. There's a voice saying this is what we need. Wow. And that's the spirit of it, right? Like nobody is speaking out about it. And I think that's definitely changed now. Yeah. But I think maybe you've experienced, I think the nuclear community, if you're not in the nuclear industry, right? If you don't work at a plant, it's hard to find your community and find others that think similarly to you. And with these events, those have been, I would say, tools to build community. And then once communities are built, then the actions come, and it's not just one event. But we currently have September as our stand-up season, which I think we might evolve for the next coming year. But basically, anybody around the world can have an event, and you share this news in our network. Basically, how did you do it? What were people's responses? What media came out? What was your goal? Yeah.
Wait, so I'm sort of amazed by the idea of the mourning the loss of the power. I didn't know. I feel like I've heard a lot about like actions in Germany, actions at Diablo Canyon in Illinois, but where have you guys done events at plant closures and like mourning the loss of power is sort of a profound idea. And like, sounds like a really amazing way of realizing that like the opposite of nuclear isn't like a neutral world. It's a world with like more coal, more air pollution, more climate change. And so like, I think that's a really, really like salient idea to mourn the loss of power. So what did that type of event look like?
Yeah. The first one that we did was for Indian Point. So back in 2021, I believe. 2021, we were talking with our allies, and it just wasn't looking like things were budging. Like it just, timing wasn't on our side. There wasn't this momentum that we could capture, people that we could flip, basically. And Cuomo was behind it. And when, once Cuomo said something, it wasn't going to change.
Yeah.
So Indian Point was coming up, and we were brainstorming ideas. So it was, and I came across on Pinterest, I was looking up like labor movements, like, looking at what other people have done. Yeah. And I saw this beautiful image of Italian workers who had laid out their white helmets in a beautiful plaza, and each one represented each of the workers. And I said, okay, well, if the mayor is going to be holding a press conference for an Indian Point, we're going to be there, and we're going to basically thank the workers for basically working there, providing clean power and providing that clean power for not only their communities, but for New York City itself. That was the largest source of clean energy. So we went there and we took this yellow helmet idea. So we did yellow, and there was 1,000 jobs that were lost. So we hand hole punched each of these helmets, these little plastic helmets, and zip tied them to the fence along the park that was right outside the plant. So as workers were going in for their last shift, as they were exiting their last shift, they saw, and it's very impactful. Like, humans are very simple creatures, creatures of habit, and we love beautiful things and color. And it was beautiful sad sea of yellow. And we saw the mayor there. And we got coverage. We had people speak there, workers from the plants, and we made it known that we did not want this plant to close. And those images were featured in National Geographic. They're on Getty Images, and I believe Loud, like Good Morning America kind of channel, covered it. And what we found is you need to capitalize on those moments, because we can go on Twitter, right, and send our messages, and we can send some emails to legislators, but really the media is a very impactful tool. So it's the first one, and it was a big success in the sense of our images were used, and in the blurb, right?
And even just like recognizing, like, I feel like so many like folks in the government probably like just think of like closing a nuclear plant, like they don't even think about it. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, we got to age that out. And so even just like taking this moment of like realizing what you're losing, I feel like that's that's such a huge step.
Right. And the people, right, too, like the recognition that, we talk about energy transition and jobs, but these are existing jobs, right? Nuclear is one of the heaviest unionized industries, right? And they protect their workers, and those workers lost their jobs, and those are clean energy jobs. And so and of course we monitored the situation, and then New York Times came out, I believe, with an article. Like, people were starting to say it close up to the deadline, we shouldn't shut down Indian Point. And then Sid Baga published the viral tweet basically showing that New York's in-state electricity emissions increased by about 30% within a very short time right after. And so we can see it, right? Jobs are lost and emissions increase. They were replaced with fossil fuels. And I believe it was replaced, one of them, I believe it's called Ravenwood, in AOC's area was turned back on to deal with the energy shortages soon after in the year.
But did she comment on that at all, or did that?
No, I think AOC's position has since changed. I think she's a little bit more open to it. But as far as Indian Point, I think there was, similar to like Diablo Canyon, like Indian Point was a very heavily contested plant. Like Mark Ruffalo, Leonardo DiCaprio, all are against Indian Point and celebrated the victory. And so we were up against big money, big power.
Wow. Okay. So pivoting from sort of the sad loss of Indian Point, maybe the next, I feel like, big chapter in stand-up is Diablo Canyon.
Yes.
So tell me about that effort. Like, how did you guys first get involved, and what were some like strategies and was there anything from the Indian Point work that like learnings you guys brought to Diablo Canyon? Or
I think with Indian Point, we really began to understand the politics behind how embedded it is in the political structure. And I think specifically political parties, not saying that it cannot be changed, but there's a legacy with nuclear, and specifically with blue states, right? And I think Indian Point and California are similar in their, I'll say, like political scene. I'll say that. So with Diablo Canyon had the largest anti-nuclear protest in the United States when it was during its construction. It was a heavily contested site. There were supposed to be 6 reactors instead of 2. Imagine if we had 6 right now, right? We have 2, that's about 10% of our power, 15% of our zero carbon electricity. I say power, energy. And imagine if we had 4 more. Oh my God. So with Diablo Canyon, there was an initial effort that had started with Heather and Kristen from Mothers for Nuclear, Michael back in the day during EP days, Eric Meyer from Generation Atomic, that was under a different umbrella. They had started before the joint proposal came out. For those that don't know, a joint proposal was signed by multiple stakeholders, basically saying that we're shutting down Diablo Canyon. They will not be allowed to relicense, and we're agreeing that we're not going to relicense. PG&E was in on that. I believe Sierra Club was in on that. Labor unions from Diablo were in on that. Mm-hmm. So that effort had started back in 2016. And so up until then, once a decision was made, there was a really big feeling of just loss and, like, I would say, lack of hope of what was to come. Yeah. But fast forward to 2020, 2019, all my dates are mixed up, is when California had those, we have wildfires every year, but these were the wildfires that led to the orange skies.
Yeah. Right.
And that was a viral image showing, like, oh my God, this is climate change, right? Like, we have to act fast. And that was the same time around when California was suffering rolling blackouts, rolling brownouts, I'll say. So we didn't have enough power, and climate change is coming to kill us all. That was like the sentiment, right?
Right. And also, just to speak to, like, the orange sky, the yellow helmets, like, we just are suckers for a colorful image. Like, it's so just, like, evocative.
Yes. And so Isabel Bomeke, known as Isodope, right? She was based in California, and she basically started around this time, started to reach out to a lot of pro-nuclear organizations. And nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole because everybody said it was a done deal. That's not what we do. I think there's this air of superiority against advocacy. And I think advocacy is compared to, like, activism and, like, marching on the streets and, like, being very forceful. And advocacy is a beautiful range of things that you can do, right? Like, very small things like sending an email or posting a picture, all the way up to, like, tying yourself to a nuclear plant. You know, like, there's a range. Yeah. I haven't done that one yet, but maybe. And so she basically reached out to me and was like, hey, are you guys doing anything about Diablo Canyon? And I was like, kinda, but we can. Like, we weren't, that's one of our issues that we're looking at. But we were like, yeah, perfect. We're in California. Of course we want to save it. It just was like, who's going to restart the effort? Like, what you need some event to reignite it and to gather people, right? Yeah. So then Mothers for Nuclear got involved, and we started collecting all these random people. And it was started in, what year are we in? I think 2021, I believe, or 2020. And we started a WhatsApp group, and we're like, welcome to the group that's going to save Diablo Canyon. And we saved it we extended it for 5 years. Yeah. So during those 2 years, like, I'm not going to go in the weeds. Like, there was moments of, we all reoriented ourselves, and we're like, okay, what's the status of the plant? We created this beautiful FAQ document. Like, what about the earthquakes? Yeah. What about the extinction? What work do we have to do? Yeah. Got that all together. And we're like, okay, let's get some more people. And we started doing, like, little actions. And, you know, Isabel, with her, like, group that she's connected with, started, like, reaching out and, like, who's doing anything about Diablo. MIT study came out about Diablo Canyon and its use for hydrogen and desal. That was really good. And then Isabel did a beautiful effort to get 80 academics and scientists to sign a letter to Newsom saying, don't shut down Diablo Canyon. Like, don't call yourself a climate leader because this is what you're doing. Right. And a couple months after that letter was released, we see in the LA Times, nobody knew, but Governor Newsom had reached out to a reporter at the LA Times and basically did a story that he is reconsidering his position on Diablo Canyon.
Reconsidering.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, like, so juicy. Like, and this was like at the second year, right? And there was moments and months where we still met weekly, but we didn't have any news. But we were just, let's talk about nuclear. Like, let's keep this going. And, you know, once that article hit, Izzy didn't even know about it. And we were like, did you know about this? Like, and he, like, really reconsidered, and we're like, oh my God. And so we all gave him so much love, right? Yeah. Like, we called his office, we sent him emails, like, thank you so much for reconsidering. It takes a lot of courage to do that. Yeah, right. Especially if you're a politician. Like,
Right. People don't
You know?
change their mind that often. God, I'm sure the WhatsApp group chat was crazy then.
Oh yeah, it's popping off. We're all sending messages. Like I have to mute them sometimes because we just go off. But so that happens, right? And then Dianne Feinstein comes out with a public letter saying we should reconsider. And like
Yeah.
she's part of the old Democratic section,
Yeah.
right? Where she was anti and she's visited the plant and was like, still no.
Yeah.
And then a couple months later, we hear legislation is being proposed. So keep in mind, Diablo Canyon was supposed to go offline 2025. There's a deadline for nuclear plants to like order fuel to submit their relicensing. Like it takes time to do this because there's beautiful, complex beasts and clean energy infrastructure to keep them safely operating.
Yeah.
So legislation is being proposed. And this is where our group came in. Like Newsom, you know, I think the letter really helped Newsom, its political cover, but we did find out, you know, people within his office were telling Newsom, like, you're going to have blackouts. Like CAISO, the California Independent Operator for like the grid, and the California Energy Commission is like, which kind of monitors our climate goals and how we're getting there and our plans, was saying, you're going to have blackouts. And if Daddy Newsom wants to be president, you cannot have that happen on your watch. So the shortages were just, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we're talking about thousands of megawatts of power that we were going to have a shortfall of.
Yeah. Right.
So legislation is being proposed. We hear the word. They're like, we're going to have a public meeting. Like, we need pro-nuclear support. We need advocates for this legislation showing up to this meeting to signal to the office that this is going to be a way forward.
Yeah.
This was a 7-hour public hearing call. Like, we were on that call for 7 hours.
Oh my God.
Everybody's
Zoom
voice.
call, or there's an in-person tunnel?
No, so this was on the phone.
Oh my, God, a 7-hour
call in, right? They have a conference meeting you can follow online, but you got to call in.
Sure.
So the group that we assembled and all these advocates, all of them were on the call. All of our group was on the call. And this is, you know, we had heard from his office, like, you guys need to show up. And that was our moment. That's where the consistency of the 2 years and us meeting weekly, even though we didn't have anything to talk about, that's when it came into play. Yeah. Wow. And we outnumbered the pros or the antis, pros to antis on that call. And then a series of meetings happened and we're all calling in House meeting, assembly members, and then we had the senator meeting.
Yeah. So is this like you all like provide like talking points for all like the advocates calling in, and then they're like what does that sort of look like, the call in?
Great question. Okay, so our WhatsApp group is like our core group, right? So we have Mothers for Nuclear, we have Isodope, we have Stand Up, and then we have other organizations in there. Yeah. And so within this, I would create the documents of like, talking points, like how to call your legislator. And then we'll provide like a spreadsheet. It's like, here are all the numbers. Here's the link of how to find your legislator if you don't know who they are.
Right.
Talking points, and then also email addresses, like send them emails if you can't call in. We would do some phone banking efforts, like come on and hop on. Yeah. And I would be independently messaging people on social media and emailing them like, hey, Monica, can you please email and call? And that personal touch really goes a long way. Wow. And those are the people that showed up for Ride in public comments and over the phone. Yeah. And then it was all over to the legislation. So we showed up to the Capitol. We did some beautiful projections. And we were out there till the vote, you know, it was like till like 1 a.m, midnight that they were voting on. It was one of the last issues, and you can go into the Capitol and you can see them voting. Wow. And it was a landslide. Everybody fell in line. All the Democrats, except for a couple, all voted yes to extend Diablo Canyon by an additional 5 years. So now instead of shutting down in 2025, we have it until 2030. Yeah. But we're going to get the full 20. Yeah. So it's not 2030.
That's all you guys needed. All you needed was that reconsider. Give them an inch.
Yeah. Yes. We live to fight another day, right? We have the 5 years to breathe.
Yeah. So those like call and talking points, was it very sort of like blackout oriented, or what was the message, I guess maybe specific to California that was like really resonating
with people.
with folks in politics? Yeah.
So it was a mix, right? So I would do it by section. So first one is climate. Like if you shut down Diablo Canyon, according to this study,
Yeah.
this amount of emissions will be increased.
Right.
Or currently we have 50% of our electricity coming from gas.
Yeah.
Then the next one would be energy reliability.
Yeah.
And it was actually pretty I would say informative. A lot of, I would say, individuals would call in for the climate angle and then also touch on high electricity prices.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing, right? That California has the second highest electricity prices in the nation.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of factors
Right.
that have led to that. And then we saw businesses, energy reliability was their biggest point.
Yeah. Right.
You know, for them, it's like hospitals were like,
Right.
you can't sacrifice energy reliability because
Right. Baseload power is so important.
yeah. So it's a variety of talking points they could pick. I let them.
That's really interesting. Wow. Yeah. Just what a success. I was definitely like follow along with it on social media. I didn't get quite as involved as I probably should have, but that's like just an amazing story. So I guess that then brings us to the next question, which is what are you working on now? I feel like I've seen some stuff in Illinois. I know Pritzker just recently had a bad veto. I've seen some stuff with Germany as well. Trying to get, I saw like that Mark came out with some report about getting German planes back online. So where are the sort of priorities lying now? Is it like folks just doing like their local work? So the people in Illinois doing Illinois, the people in Germany doing Germany. But what are you guys sort of working on these days?
So I would say I'll do it by country. So in the US, so for example, California is like we have existing plants are currently fine right now. None are on the chopping block. Like we're doing okay.
Yep.
So now we're seeing throughout the US, we're talking about doing whether it's like feasibility studies for advanced reactors, small reactors, or we're seeing moratoriums being repealed. So we're working on a campaign in California, still in the works, to repeal our nuclear moratorium. Illinois was doing the same, and they had bipartisan support. And Pritzker, we believe, felt internal pressure from individuals or organizations to veto the vote. So we're going back to the drawing board to see what our options are for that.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a sense of, the AP1000s at Vogel are near complete. The fourth one's almost, it was.
Yeah, the third one's online.
Third one's online. Fourth one is being fueled, I believe. And now it's like, okay, so you built this huge project. Like, where are the big ones coming? There's been a lot of pressure and I would say push for the small reactors that, as we know, are still not built, have not been built.
Right.
So we've seen some politicians be like, okay, what about nuclear? What would that take? And I think we as advocates are looking to see, how can utilities start to order some AP1000s? What can we do there? So it's a positive vibe, US. And so I think for stand up, we're currently looking at California, Illinois, and then kind of like what's after Vogel.
Yeah.
And then abroad, we have Germany. Mark has been one of the loudest voices, international voices about the German closures. So for them, we still can restart a couple of them. So I think right there, it's our advocates are still continuing to harness that energy from those that are speaking out saying, hey, actually, we should turn them back on. Actually, we made a mistake.
Right.
And on the other side, environmental movements are like, why are we opening coal?
Right.
And we know why we're opening coal, because you shut down power. You have to have power to replace power.
Right.
And then we have countries now that since the energy crisis are like, oh, nuclear looks like a really good idea. Maybe we should include it in our national plan. So like Sweden just announced, an additional 10 plus reactors, I believe.
Yeah.
And then Norway's looking into building their nuclear to talk about nuclear.
Right.
In Denmark, they're looking at nuclear as well. Politicians are like, okay, what would it take? Then we see the Netherlands, they're going to build 2 more reactors near their existing.
Because they're all looking at Finland and how Finland just like finished their climate goals with Olkiluoto. Like they're they're like, it's like 98% of their power is carbon free now. It's like,
Yeah. It's like, oh, chef's kiss, I'm done. Oh, let's electrify. Okay, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And then we have like other countries like the Philippines and Indonesia where they're like, nuclear is now included in their national plan. And now they're like, okay, like what is this going to look like for us?
Yeah.
You know? And I think a lot of African countries as well are like, you know, they have gotten the short stick on many things for the multiple decades. So now, you know, energy sovereignty, energy reliability for them is a big one. And you know, unfortunately, the US isn't giving them many options, but Russia and China are.
Right.
So they're looking at some reactors. So with Stand Up, we are continuing to harness the good mood here in the US. And abroad, we're continuing to monitor existing sites to make sure Belgium is still on the chopping block. So, but a lot of political, I would say the political arena in the EU is changing.
Yeah.
For better, for worse, it's leaning more towards the right, center of right, which is usually good for nuclear, but usually kind of mixed on other issues.
Right.
But
it's the Russian war. Like, do you feel like the talking points in Europe, like both because of the sort of center right shift, but also war with Russia, like cutting off Russian gas, like is energy reliability sort of becoming like a bigger like leading talking point for those
Oh yeah. Like, because everybody was like, we were doing so good, right? We were on our way to meeting our climate goals and we were taking a lot of generation offline in the UK specifically too. And then energy crisis hits and we're like, oh, look at how vulnerable all of you were.
Yeah.
And how you cut production and now you're scrambling to get more online. And then you're sending, in the UK, they sent their customers during winter socks to thank them for conserving electricity and thank you for doing your part. So stay warm with your socks.
Yeah.
So right now it's energy reliability and sovereignty, you know, like you got to have your own stuff fixed, you know, worked out.
Right. Which was the like sort of, from my understanding of history, the guiding philosophy for France, right? Wasn't it an energy sovereignty like post like oil crisis, like push in the 70s? Yeah. So it's like, it's sort of interesting how like I feel like we maybe want climate change to be the thing that really excites people, but it's really only when like their light switches are turning on, like the sort of like visceral, like I don't know, things like that.
Like connecting, like it's something that everybody can remember the feeling of like turning on the light and it's not on. You're like, oh my God, the power's out. Oh my God.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, similar to you. I was so bummed it wasn't climate. It's not climate that really gets people, you know, upset. Of course, it's like it's emissions, but also I think it would be like air pollution, like the things that you can tangibly see, right? But we'll take it. And I mean, energy sovereignty, you can rebuild your nation and ensure a clean energy future with nuclear. You can do them both, which is the beautiful thing about nuclear.
Right. Amazing. Okay, so then as I mentioned earlier, the sort of like structure of this collection of interviews is nuclear and youth. So I do kind of want to chat, like just ask some questions about like, I don't know how like youth oriented stand-up is. I'm sure you interact with a lot of older folks who have been in the industry for a while who are pro-nuclear and younger folks. And so I'm curious a little bit of like, what are the differences between those? I think a question that I'm really interested in is what do you think young folks miss about the nuclear industry? And what do you think old folks miss? Like, what are the people kind of missing about like nuclear in the future? And so, anything about just sort of like nuclear and like generational thought. There's sort of a lot of questions at one, but
I like them. I'm keeping notes of each one. Okay. So stand up. So when stand up started, it is mainly, I say older, it's a range, right? Like there's all the way up to like 70, all the way down to like young 20s, right? That were initially involved, that knew enough about nuclear to want to show up to an event. And I will say initially it was mainly men. Like there's more men that are drawn to nuclear. And I think there's some difference that I've observed going to like outside events like South by Southwest. I was able to go and join the Anthropocene Institute and got to chat with like young people. And what I noticed was, you know, young people are like, oh, nuclear is good. Like I kind of heard about it. Like they really, the anti-nuclears really won when they basically, because of their heavy pushback against nuclear, then there was just a silence. Like nobody would talk about nuclear. It wasn't like you had to go to like specific classes in your education to kind of like come across it. And even then it wasn't like, it's really good. It was like, oh, this is nuclear. Like we use it, and that was it. So chatting with young folks, they're like, wow, I didn't know. Like they don't have the baggage. You have to talk to them a little bit, like lead them through, actually, it's not that scary. Oh, that was bad, but let's take a bigger context. But when chatting with the youths and with other people through my experience, I find that men, they're not scared to be wrong and like scared to have like these outward thinking thoughts and like say something that is maybe a little bit outrageous sometimes, or like really have that confidence to be like, I'm right. Whereas I think on a technical subject, and then this is just a generalization of my experience. And then with women, which I'm a woman, they're like, well, I don't know everything about it and I'm not an expert. Therefore, I cannot have an opinion or say something about it because it's so technical. So if I am going to speak, I want to make sure that it's all right. And I think men have not sometimes.
Right. Don't have like restraint.
Yeah. So, but that is definitely changing, and you don't, and I'm me coming from like not a standard technical background, you can still have an opinion and still advocate for something, not knowing exactly how it works. Because if we look at the renewable side, of course, renewables are a little bit less, they're basic, you know what I mean? Like they're just basic energy forms. And so they're like, oh, put a panel up there. Right. But like, they don't know how panels are made. They don't know how like the wind turbines are made and how they're recycled and stuff, but yet they still are promoting it.
I was gonna say, solar panels seem very simple, but then they're like this crazy layer of silicas and
it's like, how do you dispose of it? Oh, what? There's some toxic metals in there? Yes, there is.
Not just photosynthesis.
Yeah. And so that's the youth part. And then I think the generational part, I think maybe this is more so like industry folks. They're always trying to prove the merits of nuclear. Like it's really safe. And it's like, they always start with safety, which is like so infuriating as a communication standpoint. Stop talking about how safe it is. Right. And it's like, and I think they downplay the role that it's going to play sometimes. I think the older generation are like, oh yeah, I don't know how much more we're going to build of nuclear. It kind of looks good. And I think whereas the youths just in general, they're like, if we want to do it, we should do it. And I think there's this more optimistic approach to it. And I think the younger people, even like, let's say even that last energy, like the sentiment that you all are bringing and the refreshing and the modernization of nuclear is really eye-catching. It's like a gateway drug for people. Like that's what usually gets people into nuclear, is like these small reactors, and then they find out about the big ones, and then they like both, you know, and that's how they get into it. But I think the younger people are looking for something that works, and nuclear is it. I think the older people sometimes don't know how to capture that energy. And I admit I'm still learning how to capture that. Our movement is not, I would say it's like we have some young 20-year-olds and like early, but we don't have high schoolers usually in the movement. And I think at the moment it would need to be taken up by a high schooler if I went to go do a presentation, for example, and they start the initiative. I think there's going to be two movements that focus on different kind of angles for nuclear.
Interesting.
I hope I answered your questions.
No, you totally did. I think like that, especially that piece of like the older generation, like liking nuclear, and I feel like they're often sort of like in that, like they're in their own technical nerdiness of like feeling like they need to defend its safety and not like really think about growth is like I've certainly found that to be the case as well. And then I feel like I've got a couple more like just sort of like small questions that came up in my mind while you were like talking. One of them is around the AP1000. Vogel's obviously like pretty amazing, like pretty cool that Georgia's about to, I think it was like just I don't know the percentage. I don't want to say a false number, but
Yeah.
we're just all of a sudden decarbonizing a lot. And to your point of maybe other folks are now looking at the AP 1000, maybe there have been learnings from the construction delays and over
Yes.
budget implications at Vogel. Do you have a sense just from like keeping tabs on the US of where you think in the next AP 1000 might be, or where the future of like new big construction is in the US?
Yeah. So with AP 1000, so this is where like I relied on those that are in the technical field were like, what actually went wrong with AP 1000s? And I have like I'd say like a basic understanding, right? Like this design wasn't fully completed when it started construction. The supply chains weren't really that stable, I would say secure.
Yeah.
And it was one of our first big projects that we've done in a while. So like it was just a big learning curve and a big learning opportunity. But what we saw is like with the first reactor that you start to build, that one usually is the most expensive, takes the most amount of time. There's things that kind of go wrong. And then with the second one, you decrease the time. And so with big reactors, there is an apprehension from utilities, specifically in the US, to do big projects because some have gone filed for bankruptcy because financing and the perceived risk behind these projects are large, and we don't do big projects anymore. So like, and they usually go over budget and go off our timelines.
Yeah.
So, but it would be an injustice to not build more AP 1000s. Like everything is set up now. We're offering them to Poland and to other countries. Right. How dare we not build them in our own country? How lame, like what happened? I think this is where like we're going to have a new rebranding of what nationalism is, like a pride in ourselves and our ability, and like keep things at home as well as help others in abroad. So AP 1000s, I don't know where they will be built, but what I do know is that there is a couple plants that already have combined operating licenses where they literally have a license to build a reactor on site already. And so there's around, do not quote me on this, I think around 6 of them. So they can start building very rapidly. Like they could do it now. They each of them have like a different reactor design that they would like to build, but they can start building.
Are some of them AP 1000s or all of them or none of them?
I don't know. I would have to double check.
That's right.
But that doesn't mean that other plants that do have room to apply to do the AP 1000s. Right. Westinghouse is doing a big push for it. I think they need to do a bigger push. But I do think that financing is going to be a big component. So I leave that to the policy and like money wonks, like help us figure out how we can get these costs and like the initial cost down and like get some security for the utilities to do these projects.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like as Vogel now finally starts to pay for itself back. Like maybe it'll just take a couple of years of people seeing Southern company make some money before like the investors want to like
yeah. And I think another component to it is that the taxpayers did have to bear that burden. And so there is, I would say fair frustration with the company and with the project. And I think that's where the nuclear communication and the outreach and the trust is there. Like, we are sorry that this is the case. And, how are you going to talk to a future community? Like, how are you going to tell them that that's not going to happen? Like, right. how are we going to talk about that?
Right. Yeah, that's a big question. Okay, I'll end with just sort of one big final last question, which is sort of more broadly, what do you see for the nuclear industry moving forward? And what is the sort of like vision that you individually or as Stand Up for Nuclear see as sort of like where we're headed?
Yeah, I think in general that nuclear is back at the moment. There's a nuclear resurgence. I don't want to call it a nuclear renaissance, but there is a resurgence where countries, whether it's for energy sovereignty, are looking at nuclear. They don't want to be beholden to others. So I think there is going to be a lot more interest in nuclear. And what's going to come down to is like, can we deliver? Like, who else is going to start building these babies? Like Russia and China are doing it. Like South Korea is getting back in the game. So I think countries are going to come back to nuclear. There's going to be a learning curve because you have to keep manufacturing, keep doing it, and keep all the systems in place for it to become efficient, like what we always say about France, right? You just got to keep building the same ones, keep everything going.
Yeah.
But in general, I think the nuclear industry, I hope, is going to gain some self-confidence in a sense where they don't have to keep proving themselves and like asking politely to be at the table when nuclear has been the unsung climate hero throughout time. For the past 65 years of commercial nuclear operation in the United States, we provide 50% of the zero carbon energy in this nation. Right. But yet we're not included in climate conversations. So I think there's going to be some confidence instilled in workers at plants and also in the industry execs where like you're not hated, but also you need to step up and right. It's kind of like for a promotion, right? Like they're not just going to notice you from your hard work. They're going to notice you because you asked for it and you came to them and said, here's what I do. Yeah. And that's what the industry needs to do. And I think environmentalists like us they're going to keep finding their way to nuclear because they're like, things aren't working and you're lying to me. Give me a solution. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a beautiful like peak that we're going to reach. Right? Like industry's going to be confident and be cool and just like get with the program. And the environmentalists are going to be like, hey, we want to help. And then it's going to be a beautiful thing. And we're going to have so much nuclear. Yeah. We need it. Like I want power all the time, 24/7. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That was sacrificing. Wow. Thank you so much, Paris. This was a lovely conversation. And yeah, just appreciate chatting with you and everything. It was great.
It was super fun. I appreciate it.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.